Welcome back to Gaffer's Salon. I'm John Roach, a gaffer here in New York City. And today we're going to talk about a brand new pocket light by Kelvin Light out of Norway. This is called the Play Pro. Now, they had an original model called the Play. The Pro introduces CRMX lumen radio into the exact same fixture. Now, if you know anything about Kelvin, they are kind of renowned for their industrial design, their industrial build quality. They really do an outstanding job, and I think the Play Pro is no exception. The accessories are absolutely top-notch. The light itself is beautifully constructed. But let's be fair, it's entering a very saturated and crowded pocket light market, right? There are dozens and dozens of pocket lights out there in the market. I've got what I would consider to be the top pocket lights out there today. Aster Hydra Panel, Rosco's DMG Dash, and Aputure's small little MC Pro. And I would absolutely add Kelvin's Play Pro into this mix. I think these are four exceptionally great lights. I own all these. I just got the Play Pro in about a week ago. I've just been playing with it at the house and here in the shop. So I thought, you know, Andrew Locke has a set of these. He's going to do his usual in-depth review, going through all the color metrics, DMX testing, menu, operation. And he's also previously reviewed all these lights. So if you want to know about specifics about any of these lights, you can go back through Gaffer and Gear and reference any particular aspect of the light you want to compare. So what I thought would be interesting to do is really sort of talk about how the Play Pro fits in to this market, how it sort of compares to these others. We'll go through a little bit of the similarities. It's not going to be a deep dive, or it's more of a first look review. And then I want to talk about what I would consider to be the biggest difference amongst these four lights. And that would be aside from the obvious differences, right? We have large lights with more output, smaller lights, less output, lower wattage, etc. You know, similarities, of course, all these have built-in CRMX. They all have identical IP ratings, IP65, which is to say they are very robustly protected against rain, weather, dust, dirt, etc. They are identical in that respect. They also have very similar operating temperatures, meaning, you know, what's the coldest environment and the hottest environment you can use these in. They're all very similar. They fall around, say, from 0 Fahrenheit up to about 103 to 113 degrees Fahrenheit. So they have a pretty good large operating range. I would say they have similar run times relative to their size. As you might expect, the largest and highest wattage light here has the least amount of runtime. So you're getting roughly an hour and 45 minutes. Rosco claims 3 hours. I find 2.5 maybe to be more accurate. And these two right around the 2-hour mark. And of course, if you're in boost mode, it's going to be less. If you have things like Bluetooth or CRMX turned on, that's going to draw some battery. So these are all relative run times, right? And all of these work in a very similar way. They have some sort of magnetic diffusion that attaches to the front and an LCD or an A crate, right? So in the case of Aster, you clip on, you have a magnetic diffusion panel and you have a magnetic A crate, and you just make sure you have the right orientation and you clip it on. Same thing with Rosco and the MC Pro from Aputure. In this case, you get a single, relatively heavy diffusion panel, maybe close somewhere between 250 and 216, with a very thin A crate, right? And only a single A crate. The Aster, you can get a 40 or 60 degree, and you get a couple diffusion panels. And these very much same way, they clip on the front. And I think, you know, in fairness to Rosco and to Aputure, I think, you know, part of it's trying to keep this unit smaller, more compact. So I think they went with a thinner LCD. I prefer a deeper LCD. I think it does a little bit better job at sort of containing the light. So what did Kelvin do? So I think Kelvin really took a look around the market and they thought about, you know, how can we make a better pocket light? And I think some of the accessories, they've just done a fantastic job with. So to start out with, let's talk about the LCD. So this is a metal LCD. This is a hard plastic. This is a plastic that's maybe akin to like a Kino A crate. I think they're relatively robust, but they are nowhere near as nice as these egg crate LCDs. They're thick. They're housed in aluminum, they're metal. These are incredibly robust. I could toss this across the room or drop it off a roof. These would be no worse for the wear. They are really well made, I think really well thought out. And clearly just looking at these were not inexpensive to make. I'm sure Kelvin decided, hey, we want to, really up our game on our LCD, and they decided they're willing to spend more money to make a nicer and more robust product, and I think they succeeded on that front. So very much the same way you have diffusion panels. In the case of the Play Pro, they give you 3 different panels. Something akin maybe to half soft frost, 250, 216, that sort of ballpark. And very much the same way they magnetically clip on the front. But Kelvin thought, it's a little annoying that you have to orientate the direction of your LCD, right? If you don't have it right, the magnets aren't going to hold, right? It's the same with all these. It's a little different on the Aster because it's a little clear which direction this goes on. And if you eyeball it, you can see, oh yeah, the magnets are on this side, and you can line it up. But they tried to eliminate that nuisance. So no matter how you put these on, they hold, right? You put on an LCD on top, doesn't matter the orientation. And that might be a small point, but I'll tell you, when you're under the gun and you're rushing on set, to not have to think about it is fantastic. And so I appreciate that attention to detail. And I think they went a couple steps further. They thought, well, we do have some built-in diffusion. If you noticed earlier, these two have some built-in diffusion where these just have clear fronts. You can directly see the emitter. So there's some built-in diffusion to start with. And I think Kelvin thought, well, if we just sort of double up and almost mate 2 diffusions together, it's not really helping us diffuse it. But if we can add a little bit of space, and they came up with this Kelvin spacer, so that gets you further away from your emitters, and then you can apply your secondary diffusion. And of course, that's helping to spread it, make this a more homogeneous, even surface by getting the secondary diffusion panel away from the primary emitter source. And I think that's really, really smart. And again, even with the spacer, you could then add an LCD. So then you have this whole unit. It starts to creep up towards something like the size of a Hydra panel. It's not quite as big, but it's certainly approaching that size. So all in all, I think this is a really, really smart grouping of accessories. I think it's really well thought out, really well made, and I give kudos to them for this design. So I think, we'll talk a little bit about price, because price comes into play. And we got to point out that unlike, say, Aputure lights that are made in China, and I'm pretty sure Rosco and Aster, I think they're all made in China, but this is made in Norway. This is made in the EU, very much like Jacob at the Light Bridge. They make all their stuff in Austria, and of course they have to pay an Austrian living wage in the EU or in Norway. And, those costs are just going to be higher. So how important that is to you, I'm just pointing it out. Things that are made in the US, things that are made outside China, just come at a higher price point. And when I talked to Kelvin on the phone, I sort of brought that up. I said, geez, guys, this is coming in at a higher price point. And of course, Kelvin was well aware of that. And as they put it to me, they wanted to make the best possible light. They kind of wanted to really rethink some of the accessories, make them and mill them and engineer them as best as they could, and kind of let the chips fall where they may relative to price. They knew they were going to be more expensive than an Aputure light, and maybe getting close to being on par with a Hydra panel. So, the market will decide. I think it's really well made. I think it stacks up well against these other lights. So just roughly to give you an idea, price point, and it's going to depend on what accessories you get and all that, but sort of just with basic accessories for a single light, roughly $200, $350-ish on the DMG, around $400 on the Aster. If you get a case, that's going to put you up by close to $500. The Play Pro somewhere around $350. They sell what we just talked about, the 3 diffusions, the 2 egg crates, and the spacer. That comes in a kit as an accessory kit for $200. So you start pushing up around $450 for, say, an individual light. It's also available in a 3-light kit. So this is the inside of the Kelvin Play Pro. You've got your three LCDs, 40 and 60, your three lights, your three spacers, a carry strap, all your diffusions, little ball mounts. I don't know if these are particularly useful. This ball mount is designed as a hot shoe mount rather than, say, a quarter 20. But they are well made and I think would have some use. You've got three cables, and you need to buy your charging plug. These are just Anchor ones I purchased, which go in the kit. And that is basically your three light Kelvin light kit. It's in a nice soft case, well made, well constructed. And that runs about $1,600 USD. I'll mention that these others also come in kits. There's a 4-light charging case, 8-light charging case, 8-light charging case. There's a 4-light kit that's non-charging case. There are multiple configurations that you can get all these lights in. Now, relative to TM30 SSI, I pulled my Sekonic meter out yesterday, and I thought, let me just do a simple test at 100%. At 3256. And again, you can cross-reference Andrew's previous reviews and all his color metrics. But what I found is all these lights were within a couple points of each other, whether it was TM30 at 3200 or 56, or whether it was SSI. The Play Pro was a point or two higher. For example, on tungsten, I was getting a TM30 of around 97 versus about 94, and maybe a point higher on the SSI, but really, really close. Is that point difference going to matter, or 2-point difference going to matter? Maybe in some very specific circumstances. But I think generally speaking, if you're dealing mainly in a tungsten daylight continuum, right? If you're somewhere on the tungsten daylight spectrum, these are all going to be very, very, very similar. You'll find some people that swear by the skin tones reproduced by a DMG light or an RGBACL light. There's a lot of arguments about which is better. But I think, where things start to become very interesting and where these lights really differ from each other is in color science, is in the choice of color emitters. No two of these lights use the same grouping of emitters to produce their full color range. So that is worth talking about. The Play Pro is the first RGBACL pocket light on the market. So that's red, green, blue, lime, amber, cyan. That's what Kelvin's entire line of lights is, RGBACL. Also, for example, ProLight, the Orion 300, the Orion 675, that was an RGBACL light engine. When ARRI decided to move from their older sky panel to the ARRI Orbiter was their first light using RGBACL. When they launched the ARRI X and the new version of the sky panel, ARRI moved everything to an RGBACL emitters, and that's what their color science is based around. When we moved to Aputure, for many years, Aputure has used and stuck with RGBWW, right? Red, green, blue, white, cool white, warm white emitters. And their entire line of colored lights, even the Amaran lights, are all based around RGBWW. Rosco DMG, they use RGBLAW, red, green, blue, lime, amber, white, as a 4000 Kelvin white emitter. And that's true in their entire line of lights. And Aster, yet another solution. Aster, going way back to the launch of their Titan tube, RGBMA, red, green, blue, mint, amber. And that forms the color science of their entire line of lights. So whether you get a Hyperion, a Titan, a Hydra, a Pluto, it's all based on RGBMA. So what does that mean? Is one of these better than the other? Well, that's really an ongoing debate. Constant arguments, discussions about which one might produce better colors. I don't think there's a clear answer. What I'm feeling and starting to see and observe in the market is I feel like there's kind of more of a push towards something around RGBACL or a future permutation around RGBACL. I think it's no surprise that ARRI really had to rethink where they were going to move from the original sky panel, and they clearly decided at the point of time that the Orbiter hit the market that they were going to switch emitters, and they decided for ARRI, their belief was that RGBACL was the best possible choice of emitters to put in, and that was what was going to formulate their color science. Now, it is very tricky for manufacturers to suddenly change what kind of emitters they're using and change, in part, their color science, right? So you have Aputure that has, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of units out there in the world, all RGBWW. Their entire line of lights is RGBWW. All Aster products, RGBMA. So they're going to have to think long and hard, and they're going to have to bide their time and wait until that new improved technology becomes so significantly different that it's time that they're going to have to make that shift to something better. And I think that's what ARRI thought when it took them 7 years to come out with the new Sky panel. The time was right for them to shift their color science. I'm not sure the time is right for these folks yet, but Kelvin decided when they started out to invest in RGBACL as their color science. So, a lot of opinions about this. I think it's clear to me that RGBACL in general produces, for example, a better yellow, right? I think RGBWW struggles a little bit with reproducing certain colors, yellow being one of them. I think in general you can get a little bit better, more saturated colors out of RGBACL than RGBWW. These sort of fall somewhere maybe in between. And it's not to say these are bad. And a lot of it, like we know as pros, if you're going to have to match very specific colors, you would be best served by using the same brand of light with the same color science, so you can be sure that on camera all your colors are going to match. So if you've got a bunch of Helios and Titan playing in the background, you would be well served to use a Hydra panel and keep your color science consistent. But in the real world, we know it's not always possible. This light just might be way too big, and you need something that's smaller, more compact, whatever. And so there are many times where we have to mix lights on set. So the question becomes, can we mix a Hydra with the MC Pro? Can we mix an RGBACL light with the Hydra? You know, those kind of questions often require testing. It depends on the particular color. So what I thought would be interesting would be just to take a look at a color that's pretty difficult for LEDs often to reproduce, and that is a yellow. So if we set these lights to a hue angle of 60, we put our saturation at 100%, we try to achieve a deep saturated yellow. All these lights have advanced HSI, meaning we can set the white point. So we can set the white point the same, 5600 on all these lights. And I thought to go one step further, rather than just dial in the hue angle on the light, because what I've discovered in my own testing is sometimes you dial in 60 hue angle on the light, but when you put your spectrometer to it, it's actually reading 40 or 80 or some other number. It's not anywhere close to the 60 you set on the light. Part of that is it costs a lot of money to engineer that entire spectrum and get every single hue on point. So I find lights oftentimes, whatever I set on the light is not exactly what the spectrometer is telling me I'm getting. Some people move to XY to try to make that more precise. I personally find XY, sometimes it's the same problem, is that if that XY is not calibrated, then it's kind of meaningless, and you're going to have to adjust. You're going to have to set your XY in your light, meter it. Chances are you're not getting the same XY value, so you'll have to adjust the light to get the exact XY value that you want, right? So what we'll do is we'll set these lights by meter to be as close as we can get them to a 60 hue angle, 100% sat, base color at 56. I'll turn the overhead shop lights off. We'll have a Vortex 8 at 5600 Kelvin, just to give us a little base level. And we're just going to look. This is not a scientific test. The exposure and everything's going to be a little off, but we're just going to look at colors and switch between these four lights on a yellow and see just generally, is it similar? Is it way different? How are these lights performing with a saturated deep yellow? And then we'll take a look at something that should be easier for any of these lights to achieve, which is a very saturated primary color like a red. So we'll go back and set these to 0 hue angle and just take a look at some reds. So we can take a look at the differences. And we're going to start with the RGBACL Play Pro. And we're just going to take a look at the kind of yellow that we're getting out of an RGB ACL light. And then we'll take a look at the dash, right? So this is the dash, RGB ACL, the dash, and then we'll take a look at the Aster Hydra Panel. So that's Hydra Panel, Play Pro, Hydra Panel, Play Pro, Hydra Panel. And lastly, we'll take a look at the RGBWW MC Pro. Play Pro, MC Pro, Play Pro. And again, these are set as close to a 60 hue angle to a yellow as you can get. So clearly we have spectrum differences, and the ability to render color is different on all these lights, which all use different emitter categories. So that's just giving you a sense. That's not admittedly not a scientific approach, but clearly these lights are not matching when set as close as we possibly can get them to the same hue angle at 100% saturation with the same base Kelvin temperature. So in the case of yellow, these are going to be hard to match each other on set, which just goes to say you're going to have to be careful when you're using particular colors. Now, this is just one color. We could try reds, we could try blues, we could try aquas, etc., etc. But I think you're going to see similar results. Now, in some cases, blues might work better. Yellow is a difficult color for a non-RGB ACL light to reproduce, I think. It gets trickier. I think we're seeing the worst performance out of the MC Pro relative to this particular yellow. So to continue with this unscientific test, I've set each light to 100% sat. The base color is 5600 Kelvin, and I've just dialed in a hue angle of 0 on the light. I'm not metering it with my Sekonic. I'm just going with whatever the light has given us at a hue angle of 0, and we're going to take a look. So once again, we'll start with the red of the Play Pro. And then we'll take a look at the red of the DMG Dash. So Play Pro, DMG Dash, Play Pro, and we'll go to the Aster Hydra Panel. That's the red zero hue angle, Play Pro, Hydra, Play Pro, and lastly the Aputure MC Pro. Again, hue angle is 0, Play Pro, MC Pro, Play Pro, and now we'll look MC, Hydra, MC, Hydra, and let's take a look at the Hydra versus the DMG Dash. And this is 0 hue angle, full sat. I know the intensities are a little varying, but just to give you a sense of the red that's being produced out of these 4 lights. So what's the conclusion? If I had a gun to my head, which of these pocket lights would I buy? That's a really tough call. I think if the question was, if I had a gun to my head, which color science would I back? Where would I put my money? I think I would put it on RGBACL. I think if you look at what ARRI has done, there's no question ARRI takes their bloody sweet time updating their lights, right? It took them 7 years to decide what to do and which way to go relative to the Sky panel. And they do a tremendous amount of R&D. They bought, they bought onto RGBACL, right? And that is the direction they're going. I would expect any other future fixtures that are coming down the pike from ARRI would be at least based on RGBACL. I think moving forward, we might see people try to add some other emitters or multiple emitters to really try to expand the spectrum, right? Improve the spectrum, improve SSI, TM30. That's always that's the race we're in, right? We're trying to get to that same gold standard of a tungsten light. And I think, it's no secret that Aputure purchased ProLight. ProLight was a company that based all their IP intellectual property was about RGBACL lights. So we'll see over the course of the next year whether we see a move away from RGBWW lights with Aputure or not. Now look, if you already own a bunch of RGBWW lights, whether they're Aputure or other brands, you're probably going to be best served sticking with the pocket light that is RGBWW. Or if you have a whole bunch of Asteras and Plutos and Hyperions, you know, you might be better served to have a Hydra panel. But we all know sometimes, you know, you want something that's smaller on the background of your set because you got to fit in a little nook or cranny, or vice versa. You need something a little bit bigger. You want to throw a little DOP choice softbox on this for a little edge or a kiss on talent. It's not always a perfect world on set. We oftentimes have to mix different brands of fixtures. But when we're trying to achieve a particular color, best practices would say, let's stick with the same brand of lights and the same color science, right? So anyway, it's a tough call. I think RGBACL for me is the way that we're going to move as we move forward in improving the color science that we have available to us. But you know, these are all still performing really well, particularly when they're isolated amongst their own, right? When we stick with all RGBMA or we stick with all RGBLAW, you know, we're going to be just fine. So it's going to be really interesting to see how and when these manufacturers decide to move on to the next thing. But this current crop of pocket lights is fantastic. I don't think you can go wrong. I think you just have to make some smart decisions relative to your own workflow and the kind of gear you own and the applications you know, that you need. For me, having a mix of some different pocket lights makes sense. Anyway, if you're in New York City and you'd like to do a demo or try out the Play Pro, hit me up. I've got a couple 3-light kits. I'd be happy to lend it to you. Shoot me a PM or a direct message or an email. And thanks so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you in Salon.